In this week's Torah portion, Beshalach, we read the conclusion of the great exodus from Egypt. The Israelites were now freed from the tyranny of Egypt, but as we read in chapter 16, they now found themselves wandering through the wilderness. Hungry and unsure where their food would come from, the Israelites grumbled to Moses and Aaron, saying, "Would that we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full, for you have brought us into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." And in the next verse, the Lord responded, saying to Moses, "Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you." And how did God do that? Well, the text says that in the morning a layer of dew was on the ground, and then it says, when the layer of dew had evaporated, behold, on the surface of the wilderness there was a fine flake-like thing, fine as the frost on the ground. Almost in a childlike manner, the Israelites' response was, "What is it?" Well, it was manna, or at least that's what the Israelites called it. The Hebrew word for what is man, so they called the bread manna, a play on words connected to their curiosity when they first saw it. And as the chapter continues, we read God's instruction regarding the daily collection of the manna, especially in relation to the Sabbath. And interestingly, this relationship between the collection of the manna and the Sabbath will wonderfully teach us about our salvation, especially in relation to the coming kingdom. The Lord instructed that each person gather as much of the manna as they could eat. The Lord indeed would provide for their daily needs. But then in verse 22, we are told that on the 6th day of each week, they gathered twice as much bread. And this was, as Moses explained, because the next day, the 7th day, was a Sabbath observance, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake, and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over put aside to be kept until morning. Moses went on to explain that the manna would not be available on the Sabbath. He said, 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will be none. And from this passage, we learn that a very important part of Sabbath observance is the process of ensuring that throughout the week you gather enough food, and then by Friday afternoon you have ensured that you have prepared and cooked enough food to last throughout the Sabbath. Gathering and cooking in its various forms are two of the categories of work that are prohibited on the Sabbath. Having food already prepared and ready to eat on the Sabbath is actually a wonderful picture of the coming kingdom. Enjoying already prepared food on the Sabbath gives us a glimpse into what life in the kingdom will be like. In the kingdom, we will be able to rest in God's presence, knowing that the time to work out our salvation is complete. And perhaps this is why the Lord commanded that a portion of the manna be preserved for the sake of posterity. The text goes on to tell us what Moses then instructed Aaron to do. It says, "Take a jar and put an omer full of manna in it and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout your generations." And the writer to the Hebrews confirms that the portion of manna was one of 3 items that were kept inside the Ark of the Covenant. The portion of preserved manna served as a witness of God's provision, and that there is a future before us in which we will all enjoy the bread that God will provide for us in the kingdom. Indeed, may we all be a part of that coming reality and eat of the bread in the kingdom. As it says in the Gospel of Luke, "Blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God."